Judy, are you on there? Maybe she could hear. I don't know, because Tom's there, but he can't seem to hear us.
Yes. Okay, we're here. You hear us now?
Okay, yes. And so they can kind of make their comments. People were just saying they weren't really sure. They're going to have to study it. And I said, like we always do, you go study things afterwards. There were questions and comments in the chat. I don't know if you saw them about reasons they may disagree, but that again is just for study. So I don't know if you saw it in the chats before or not, Kim.
No, I wouldn't.
Hein.
I'm never offended when people don't agree with everything I said. I've given that part up. But yeah, no, it's definitely some stuff to study. And I would be very interested if anyone has any further light or anything. I'd be absolutely.
And what is an email they can reach you? They were asking.
Why don't you put your email in the chat, Tom?
Yeah, okay.
And we've started another one, but the chat's there. So go ahead. Is it there? I don't see the chat.
Okay, type your message here. Go ahead and type.
Yeah. Tom, as I always say, you know, you're between friends and family here, so we can ask questions.
Oh, absolutely. And don't worry about offending me. I've given up on that. This is not about me.
Yeah. Yeah, we
About all of us.
yeah, no, it's you know, I always believe that one learns so many new things and so on, and sometimes that initial thing is a bit jarring or a bit different from what one believes. But one thing I've learned, like you said, is I will not question somebody else's study. If I have my own view, I will try and find if it's or measure it against or test it against what is being said.
Yeah.
But you can never, and I said it to somebody else the other day as well that was very vehement on their view. It was about the flat earth. And I said to this person, you know what? You've done the study, you believe it, okay? Nothing that I will say is going to change your mind, okay? But what I'm asking you is, let's still be friends, okay? And I heard that term in 2011 at camp meeting. Rankas of Stevanovic and Walter Fight was speaking to each other, and they had a vehement disagreement about the revelation. Like, let me tell you, there's like 400 camp meeting people sitting watching these two giants talking to each other about revelation, and they were opposed. Like, you could mob for 3 hours. I just sat there, and at the end of the time, Rankas Stevanovic stood up and he walked over to Walter, and he stretched out his hand and he said, I hope we still can be friends.
Right.
You know, because they never agreed. So,
well, that's just it.
There's a lot of interesting things, and it doesn't mean that it's all right
Yeah.
or all wrong.
Yeah.
We all have things, so we just study it. But his email is in the chat for anybody that needed it.
Thanks, Tom.
And we're ready to go ahead.
If I could just take one more minute here. There is a quotation. I wanted to read this, but I just didn't get it. But seeing how we're still talking. In Patriarchs and Prophets, there's a chapter in called the Annual Feast, which I know all of you. She says something very interesting, that the Feast of Tabernacles were not only commemorative, but typical. It not only pointed back to the wilderness sojourn, but at the Feast of Harvest, it celebrated the ingathering of the fruits of the earth, and pointed forward to the great day of final ingathering, when the Lord of the harvest shall send forth reapers to gather the tares now, together in bundles for the fire, and to gather the wheat into his garner, that's the holy city. At that time, the wicked will all be destroyed. They will, she quotes Obadiah, and she says, they will become as though they had not been.
Yeah.
At what time are the wicked going to become as though they had not been? And I believe she's talking about after the millennium, when the wicked are completely destroyed. They're not going to be raised again. It will be as though they had not been. That's what this is talking about. So yeah, I'm thinking we've got to look bigger all the time. So I just wanted to share that quotation.
Okay. Lots to think about. Okay, good evening, good morning to everybody. We are on April the 11th, a very auspicious day for myself and Diane, like I said before, married 36 years. And yeah, and I'm late in the camp meeting this year. Sandy normally puts me right up front, probably because she wants to get me out of the way quickly. But yes, I'm just so blessed by the messages. For 2 nights, I haven't been on Zoom, but I have been watching you, Tom, on YouTube as well, and some of the other speakers as well. Yeah, it's been a long weekend here by us, and Diane and myself has taken some time for ourselves, especially because of our wedding anniversary and so on. And the Lord has really blessed us with us being together and just sort of reestablishing our relationship and love and things like that. So I really, you know, it's just a wonderful time of the year for us as well. So let me open with prayer for us. Our loving Father in heaven, Lord, thank you once again for bringing together a wonderful group of your servants. And Lord, thank you for all the wonderful messages that test us, that stretch our minds, that make us think about things once again, Lord, because sometimes we fall into a pit where we just repeat the same thing over and over again without really looking and reading at it. And Lord, that's where the danger comes of becoming really complacent and looking past what you're trying to say to us. And so, Lord, as we go into this specific message this evening, it's a much more secular message, Lord. I want you to bless it because you have placed this on my heart for a while. And I know it's very contentious. It deals with a very thing that's near to most people's hearts, if one is honest. And Lord, just to create a bit of hope for people out there about what is coming in the financial world, in the economic world, and just to show them that really it's not all bad news. Lord, you've promised you will look after us in the time of trouble, as Tom mentioned tonight. And Lord, I call on this promise this evening. Hence, I hope that you bless this message that I believe comes from you. I ask this in the mighty name of your Son, Yeshua. Amen. So, ladies and gentlemen, my favorite topic, banks, money, and economy. And I thought, let me do this because I've watched and I've read some things over the last couple of months, and I have said some things, and I know some of you might not agree with me or agree with me, but this is not to challenge anybody, because I really have gone and looked at the history of mankind and Bible economics. And throughout the Bible, there is mention of money, of banks, of economies thriving. We think about the 7 good years and the 7 bad years in Joseph's time, and what Israel went through when they got to Egypt, and so on. And yes, it really has been in some way, form, whatever, trade, money, banks, and people trusting people with their assets and possession. Okay, and so as the world expanded, of course, things like economics that deal mainly with trade, insofar that countries trade with each other. The Bible is full of it. The rich history between Egypt and Israel, that whole relationship over the years. And if you go read Patriarchs and Prophets and Kings, you will see Mrs. White also refers to it in quite in-depth manner. And then, of course, our own prophet, Mrs. White, when she came on the scene, had many, and I've got a full book of her studies, quotes, etc., on business, which I've done 1 or 2 seminars that or talks about at Tabernacles as well. But today, I just really would like to talk to you about what's happening currently in the world, and not trying to fit the economy into the Bible, but rather let the Bible show us what happened, and if we can find any link to what has happened in the Bible, maybe we can find comfort in what we see going on around us. So you'll see the Jewish word for economics is that word at the bottom there, and then I've taken just a picture of what is on the American currency. Now, I don't know if you guys actually read what is on your currency, okay? And you're probably so used to it that you don't think about it anymore. But let's have a look at what that really means. I'll put it there. So, in God we trust is the official motto of the United States as well as the Florida state. It was first made the official motto in 1956, replacing out of many one, or e pluribus unum. So as you can see there, it changed from the bottom one in 1881, interesting date that in Adventist history, to in 1956, it was changed by the president to that. And the history of, and I got this off the official side of In God We Trust Day. There's an official day, I believe, in the United States, April 22nd, 2023 this year. It says, In God We Trust is the official motto of the United States. The US Congress adopted the phrase in 1956, replacing E pluribus unum, which had been the motto since 1776 when the Great Seal of the United States was initially designed. The origins of this phrase was a political motto date back to the American Civil War, during which the Union supporters aimed to solidify their faith in God and boost morale for the battle ahead. In 1864, the capitalized form of In God We Trust first made its appearance on the 2-cent piece, and then was also printed on paper currency from 1957 on several post stamps since 1954. Your President Dwight Eisenhower endorsed a law passed by joint resolution of the 84th Congress, which requires the words In God We Trust to appear on all American currency. This came into effect 2 years after the law was made and was used on paper money for the first time. Congress would later pass the follow-up law, also signed by President Eisenhower on July the 30th, 1956, declaring the phrase a national motto. This provision has also been authorized in public institutions or schools, while the states of Florida, Georgia, and Mississippi have incorporated the phrase in some of their state symbols. The motto is also used in other countries' currencies, such as Nicaragua's coins. The In God We Trust motto is still popular in America to this day. Okay, and remember, I've just taken this off the internet. According to a 2019 student poll by College Pulse, it showed that 53% of students supported the inclusion of In God We Trust phrase in the American national currency. So my question to you guys this evening is, do we trust in God? And so I want you to think for a moment for yourself. When you see that every time on your currency, does it bring something to mind? Does it bring something to your heart? And of course, currently going on in the world, there's major stirrings in the financial world. And I'm going to talk about the major ones. But the first question I really want to pose, and I pose it to myself as well, because I'm at a critical stage of my life. I've just retired. My life savings. I got a thing this morning that said the final figure that I received, the payout to foresee for my future, had actually in the last month of my sort of work time during February, before I retired on the 1st of March, dropped by a total of $186,000. Oh, not dollars, rands. Sorry, that would be a lot of money. 186,000 rands, which is roughly about $15,000. It dropped in 1 month. Now that's a lot of money for me. In 1 month for the pension fund to drop, but it was because of the current economic situation worldwide, the banks, the conservatism around people, the war in the Ukraine not coming to an end. There's a number of things that impacted on it. And then, of course, also in it, the American interest rates being lifted by your Federal Reserve, banks in Europe also being under pressure currently because of tight margins, etc., etc. So the question is, are we anxious? And I ask myself, Hein, are you anxious? I'll be honest with you, folks, not for a moment since I've retired have I been anxious. In fact, I am joyous at this stage because I now fully have to depend on the Lord. Whatever happens to whatever money I have or funds that I have is in his hands. And I am so grateful that I have given my heart to the Lord and that I understand that whatever happens, if the money gets wiped out tomorrow, yes, that will put a huge emotional and financial pressure on me. But I know in my heart that I've accepted the Lord and that he will lead me to that way. And we were talking about the issues around Pakistan, India, where there are millions and millions and millions of people who live in abject poverty, here in Africa as well. Okay. And we are still the 5% in the world who live at a certain level, call it above the breadline. All right. We speak about people earning $1 a day. Have you ever thought of living that way? And some of you might. I don't know all of you, but some of you might have had severe financial distress. But then I want to ask you, has the Lord not at some stage brought you out of it? Or has he not provided for you? I have a very, very dear friend who since 2016 has been going through severe financial pressure. I need to mention that because I have seen so many miracles in his life where he was about to give up and things happen. And so I want to bring a positive message to say to you, you know, are you an anxious Christian? Okay. And it says here, many who profess to be Christ followers have an anxious, troubled heart because they are afraid to trust themselves with God. They do not make complete surrender to him, or they shrink from the consequences that such a surrender may involve. Unless they make the surrender, they cannot find peace. And so when you feel uncomfortable, when you feel uneasy, all right, the first thing you need to do is to pray. Second thing you need to do is to speak to somebody, because sharing is one of the most important things. Mrs. White refers to it as well, and this comes from Ministry of Healing, strangely enough. And she's talking here about the outside pressures of life. So here's a bit of a quiz for you this evening. I thought, let me put something out there to all of you folks. Let's see if you know who I'm talking about here, and I would like one or two answers here. And so, what is the financial crisis? And I thought, let me give you a bit of just a one chapter out of a case study that talks about a financial crisis. And I want you to answer the three questions or the three red dot areas there. What do you think should go in there? So this is talking about a specific time, a specific country, and a specific government. All right. So it says the financial and economic crisis occurred in that year, in that country, and the government of that country. After a shift in government policy and a series of confiscations reduced the country's money supply, the crisis was triggered by the invocation of an old law which resulted in the early recalls of loans given, that's credit given to people, bonds, mortgages, and there was a credit crunch and a crash of real estate prices. Okay, can I ask anybody, when did this happen? When do you think this happened? And to what country is being referred to? Any takers? Come, give me some answers. Take a guess.
1929, the United States.
United States, yes. Okay. When?
1929.
1929. So the Depression.
Depression.
Right. Okay. Anybody else? Nobody else? Okay. Let's move on. Let me see if you were right. Actually, it was the financial crisis of AD 31 to 33. Who can tell me what happened during that time frame? What was a major thing that happened? We're actually having the feast of it. Jesus what? Correct.
Crucifixion.
So that financial crisis that I'm referring to there, and I just took out the dates and the country and the governing power. It actually says a financial and economic crisis occurred between AD 31 and 33 in the Roman Empire during the reign of Emperor Tiberius. After a shift of government policy and a series of confiscations reduced the Roman money supply, the crisis was triggered by the invocation of an old law, which resulted in the early recalls of loans given, a credit crunch, and the crash of real estate prices. So, Ed, it was you answering that. Okay. I actually knew what you were going to answer because it sounds so much about what is happening in the world today, isn't it? So here's how they resolved the crisis. The crisis was eventually resolved with a liquidity injection in the form of interest-free loans. What has the US government done with every time? 2008, around about now as well? They've injected liquidity into the banks, interest-free loans to the banks. If you go read Too Big to Fail, the book, or you go watch the video, you'll see that is exactly what the government is doing. And I spoke in 2013 about the American debt ceiling as well, and hyperinflation. So just what was the financial law that's spoken about during Jesus's time? Because it's very interesting when you place Jesus in that period. It starts to flesh out some very interesting things around what he was saying, especially about the widow and the mite. We assume that he's speaking specifically about the very poor. But why were people that poor? They were poor because of these laws that was going on. There was a huge devaluation of the denarii. The temple currency that they were using was also very much devalued because they were putting less and less silver, because those coins were silver, into those things and putting other types of metal into it. So according to Tacitus, which is a Roman historian, according to his annals or writings, Julius Caesar passed a law in 49 BC, before Christ, which regulated usury, the banks, okay, requiring lenders to possess a certain quantity of farmland in Italy. The law had been passed as a wartime measure to prevent capital flight from Italy, but had been largely ignored. So during the reign of Augustus, the Roman government significantly expanded the money supply through cash handouts. So they actually printed money and handed it out, okay? So printed being the coins. They didn't have notes, so they had coins, okay? So extensive public works and acquisition of Italian agricultural land for veterans to settle, because remember, the Roman army was huge. And so when people came out of these huge army and they were still alive, okay, they got pieces of land, but they couldn't farm it because they didn't have money. There was no capital injection. So as a result, interest rates fell significantly from around 12% to 4% per annum. And the moment your rates fall on interest rates fall on these type of loans, okay, your margins become smaller, okay, and there's less profit, and then the money supply slows down, okay, because yeah. So however, later in his reign, the public investment declined, and the successor Tiberius exacerbated the reduction through frugal spending. So like many governments, okay, when there's now problems in the economy, they stop spending the tax. That causes everything else to slow down. So there's no capital injection into the country, into infrastructure, into the upliftment and building of cities, etc., etc. Okay, so the money sits there, it's there, but it's not being used, and that's got another negative effect. So despite the stagnating money supply, gold and silver coins flowed out of the Roman Empire to pay for imports and luxury goods, especially from India. That's still happening today, folks, by the way, in the same country, by the way, as well. Following the arrest and execution of Sejanus in 31 AD, his followers prosecuted and the assets seized for the benefit of the Roman state. Additionally, several major business houses had become bankrupt to the external events, and a bank run had occurred when a banking house failed and all other banks refusing to bail it out. These events resulted in a general decline of prices of real estate, agricultural land, and prompting the Roman government to intervene. Does that not sound like virtually every single country in the world at the moment? Okay, just I'm not going to go too much into the further law, but just to say that this whole thing, okay, can actually be, as we just proved, be put anywhere in the world at any time. And so just to get to the background of banks then, and this comes straight off of a biblical site which does sort of research on banks, and from a biblical perspective, I've used it a couple of times, all right. And the the banks are mentioned in the bank. Matthew 21:12, and Matthew was a banker, if you want to call it that day. A table, a bench, or a counter on which ancient money changers or bankers displayed their wares. English bank, also the shop or building where financial transactions were conducted of performance against each objective. And you see, when Jesus went into the temple, into the forecourt of the temple, these banks had set up place in the forecourt of the temple. And he saw that as people desecrating the house of his father. And you must understand that there were some very underhanded deals going on there. Once again, there was, if you go look at how the sacrifices worked, okay, people had to exchange money for a sacrifice, and there was then denarii for the Jewish currency, okay, and there were people making a lot of money. The banks were making a lot of money, and so it says the banks and banking business were first established in Israel after exile. Previously, people generally buried their treasures and valuables. Now that became sort of an impossible thing, especially with the population growing and people moving around. You know, you would walk evidently through some parts of, say, call it in the Sinai Peninsula, whatever, and you might come across somebody's possessions that's been buried, that's now been blown open by a storm. All right, it wasn't a good idea. So people wanted a safe space and place to keep their call it their treasures and their money. So, you know, these archives about the wealthy banking house known as Marasu and Sons, 450 before Christ, which contains many Jewish names. In Old Testament times, lending was not for capital purposes, but for helping a man in need of poverty. Deuteronomy 15:7-11 talks about that. Go read it. Very interesting piece of scripture. The word bank, as now known, was not part of the vocabulary. Interest could not be charged on loans except to a foreigner, and poor people receive special consideration. And those are all in Exodus 20-25, Leviticus 25:35-37. The prophets condemned high interest rates, Deuteronomy 23, verses 19 and 20. And so, like I said, there was many of these things in Jesus's time. I don't want to delve too much on them. You can maybe just, if you want the PowerPoint presentation, it's all there. But there was a very sophisticated banking system. There was a very sophisticated economy and trade and businesses going on in Jesus's time. We must never, ever think that somehow today, in terms of just the concept of doing business, the concept of banks, that we in the last 150 years have suddenly come up with a new idea. It ranges back, right back into Jesus's time. And if you can see there, even before his time, quite far back. So is history repeating itself? Well, the crisis that we're speaking about here was, as we said, was resolved following government intervention with Tiberius appointing a commission of 5 senators who would provide interest-free loans to landowners in financial distress. So they were lending the farmers money. And that's what happens here in our country, okay? The farmers go through bad times, whatever, their property depreciates. Diane actually works in that arena. She gets a lot of this stuff all the time. There's failed crops because of weather, whatever. It's not insured, or it is insured. The banks insist on it these days. But if you look there, a sum of 100 million sesterces, which is a heck of a big amount, was allocated for this program, and the loans were secured with agricultural land twice the loans amount. So they took, as we say in the bank, they took security to the extent of 200%. And so Tiberius' successor Caligula, very well-known guy, resumed the extensive state expenditures through public works and projects after he took power in 37. 37 AD. So it's been compared to the 2000 and 2008 financial crisis. Okay, so yeah, Ed, you might have the wrong year, but it is very much what has happened, especially in America, and it parallels on the real estate aspects that has happened and that is still happening. And that includes the Great Depression, the 1973 oil crisis, the 1987 Black Monday, and then, of course, the housing bubble. Just to give you some financial crisis in recent world history, okay? And I'm building up to something here, folks. I'm giving you some background because I want to prove to you that, you know what, we've been in a crisis permanently. It's not like we've gone through some good times. We might think we've gone through some good times, but somewhere in the world, there's always been some type of crisis. Now, this is just the rest of the world. The financial crises throughout Europe, currency crises, debt defaults now with Russia and Ukraine. There's a lot of talk about that. And by the way, I watched Keith, I watched the IMF. My CEO of my bank has gone to Davos every year. So I was watching the whole thing on the Russian debt default and so on. And I think the West has made somewhat of a mistake there. But we'll see how that plays out. But it's interesting to see how that's going to affect. And I'm going to show you America and Russia at the moment, because it's two of the major players, and then China as well, how that fits today, and how, as a Christian, we should be looking at this. Okay, the UK, United States, and I got one little slide because there's not too much of them going around, but you can see here the US economic crisis timelines. Okay, you had the securities and loans crisis in 1990. Those were a bank crisis. You had a recession in 91. The Gulf War had a major impact on the boosting of your economy, by the way. The bond market meltdown in 94. Asia financial crisis had once again an impact because of America's relationship with Asia. You had the Mexican peso crisis in 1994, the Russian ruble crisis, and so we go on. Afghanistan war, once again, you must understand that war has a positive impact on your economies. America always scores out of war. We had the housing bubble, which is probably one of the worst financial crises, apart from the one that we might be facing at the moment. Okay, so that's just that. So what drives the US dollar? In short, three things: supply and demand, market sentiment and psychology, technical economic data. Because people tell me all the time, and when I was watching these guys at Davos, you know, they were talking about various things and currencies and the digital currency, and I'm going to talk about the digital currency in a moment. You know, as all being the big thing that's going to save the world economy. There's not one single thing that's going to save the world economy. There's a number of things that will possibly lift it, because we're coming out of a major cycle that's been going on since the Second World War. We are like an airplane that's run out of petrol at the, what is it, jet fuel. Okay, so near the tail end of an unstable year for the global economy this year, okay, the US dollar hit a 20-year high in value. A number of factors, both domestic and international, have contributed to the strength of the US dollar. Through economic conditions, the shift in 2023, experts predict the dollar will hold a strong position. Now, that's very good news for you guys in the United States. Very good news. Okay. Apart from the fact that your previous president is facing what I call the Inquisition, but whatever you want to call it, impeachment, and all the political hoo-ha that's going on in your country. It's not much different from what's going on in my country. Okay. Despite that, the factors that run the American economy is still the strongest in the world by miles, or what I say, by at least 50 years. Okay. People who say that the American dollar is about to fall are fools. Quite frankly, they are. And this is not Hein saying that. This comes from people across the world, and even you'll see in a moment the BRICS people, the BRICS bank people, the BRICS conglomerate or association says that. Okay, it is not going to be easy for anybody in the world to lift the dollar out of its current position in terms of being the reserve currency, the currency against which we buy and sell things. Okay, and why I say buy and sell is because it's felt that through this, specifically the USDC, and we spoke about it a couple of weeks ago, and so on, the US central bank digital currency. Okay, and this comes from Investopedia. I use Investopedia a lot because I think they are very, very accurate in what they say. So a possible, though currently non-existent, digital form of US dollar issued by the Federal Reserve. Okay, now there is a reason, a very big reason, and one of that reasons is the reason I'm still going to be employed, and that reason is, of course, fraud and money laundering. folks, fraud and money laundering, especially money laundering, is the biggest business in the world, probably by 100-fold. There was a series just landed in the last week, and you can go look at it. It's done by Al Jazeera, which is the news channel for the Far East. Okay. And they did a series, 3 episodes, 1-hour episodes, uncovering the biggest gold smuggling ring on the African continent and the Far East. We're talking trillions of dollars, folks. People walking with suitcases of gold out of South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Dubai, taking it to central places in Dubai, coming back with cases full of dollars, coming through customs. The level of fraud is at such high levels, you can't believe it. That money never, of course, reaches the people it should reach, the poor or those in need that we just spoke about. These are just to enrich some few. Now, if there is some type of monitoring, and that's why things like your Bitcoin, et cetera, is also used for very nefarious things. And I'm definitely not a Bitcoin fan, never have been. Okay. There's no regulation on it. And people say, well, you know, if the government regulates us, okay, we're all going to lose our money. Well, not quite. Go read what it says here. This comes off the official site of the Fed. So before launching the US central bank digital currency, the Fed must be satisfied that a safe digital asset accessible to the public that is without credit and liquidity risks. You need to go, if you ever want to go study what that is the centrality of a bank, credit and liquidity risks. If the bank has got a liquidity risk, it's when it closes down. Okay. And liquidity is not necessarily money. Okay. There's a couple of things that add to liquidity. And that is privacy protected, intermediated, transferable, and identity verified. More specifically, privacy protection implies safeguarding the consumer's privacy rights as well as impending criminal activity. Now, folks, here's the thing. All right. We can look at it 2 ways. We can look at it negatively and we can look at it positively. At this stage, criminality is damaging 2/3 of the world economy in a severe way. All right. It adds to drugs. It adds to human trafficking on a scale you will not believe. Now, I'm not saying do away with cash. And I'm not saying give the government access over everything. But what I am saying is there should be better control. Because my question to you tonight as a Christian is, well, you've got your money in your bank. Okay. Hopefully it's there still tomorrow. Have you got anything to hide? Do you pay your taxes? Are you above board with your dealing? As a Christian, you should tell me yes. So none of these things should actually really be of any concern of yours, because we are just normal people. None of us are billionaires or millionaires or whatever. So our little bit of money really at the end of the day is there for us to live off, to do ministry and things like that. And if it's safe, protected by a system like this, by the way, there's nothing like an unhackable system. All right, banks are hacked daily. In South Africa, 2 of our major banks have been hacked in the last year. And what they do is they don't steal money, folks. They steal information. So they access your information, because through your information is where the biggest fraud then happens. They create this series I was telling you about the gold fraud, and then just unbelievable amounts of gold and dollars circulating, coming in cases, and they use false identities. So a false identity is worth actually more than gold at this stage. They found we had a criminal escape who bought himself out of a jail, 5 million rand. He's lived like the king a year. A year later, they've now found out by accident, and they've uncovered a huge conspiracy within government channels, officials, etc., etc. But this guy had so much money, he was walking around with suitcases up to 5 million rands in jail. Okay, so cash has got its good side and it's got its very bad side. So transferable means that the CBC is accessible to US customers regardless of intermediaries they use, making payment more efficient. The big thing that's happening everywhere, folks, is that, for instance, you don't have to go through an intermediary, through a bank anymore. You can pay, Hein can pay Sandy direct. then it doesn't need to be a bank. Those systems are coming online in all of our South African banks now. All right. But there's still a paper trail. So there's still a paper trail between my account and your account overseas. There's no more intermediary like a SWIFT, which is one of the things that, of course, the United States closed down for Russia when the war started in terms of the sanctions. So all of those things are now going by the byway. So it makes world trade quicker, instantly. And somebody paid some funds into my account through PayPal the other day. Let me tell you, it was instant. You know how PayPal works, folks. It's like within minutes, it's there. Okay. So all of these things, even paying dollars, and it comes through as the rand, as a South African currency, will not these days take longer through most of the channels, longer than 30 minutes. In the old days, you had to wait 3 to 4 days or even like that. Those things have all changed. Now, digital currency mostly is to be used for international and big transactions as well, to safeguard certain transactions, okay? And so there is a proper trail of what's going on. You're going to a Costco and buying some groceries, government's not interested in that. So the Federal Reserve's goals for CBCD is to take into account households, businesses, entrepreneurs, and consumers by offering more users and efficiency than the fiat, in other words, the reserve currency, or under other supplementary monetary options. Now, you've probably heard or not heard of BRICS. BRICS is very big in our country. As you can see there at the end, the S is South Africa. So it's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. We are part of, call it the new IMF, Keith. You can go read about BRICS, okay? We've got our own bank. We're not quite anywhere near to what America and IMF is doing, all right? But to have an alternative to that. Now, I've seen a plethora of articles and things talking about BRICS taking over the world, doing their own currency, sort of putting it against gold, oil, because Saudi Arabia and a number of other countries now want to become part of BRICS. Okay, folks, the cost involved, just the physical cost involved in doing that, is beyond what the worth of these 5 countries are together. The physical cost of changing what they call a fiat currency or reserve currency is horrendous. The printing and putting out there a new currency and then putting it across 5 countries like this, I would say it's a near impossibility at this stage. So BRICS is not a threat to anybody in the world at this stage. And I don't think in the foreseeable future it's going to be. So cashless, okay, so most of us are cash. I know there's a lot of people who still prefer cash, and that's good. I've got some cash put away here in the house, although that's dangerous for us here in South Africa, because if people know there's cash in your safe, I can promise you they'll come break into your house. We are living in the most high crime countries in the world. So we basically go to cards. But if you think places like Japan, for instance, Japan is very much still a cash user society. They use very little cards once again. So it depends on the countries, depends on where you are. United States still uses a ton of dollars. And by the way, as I say, the baddies in the world also like the American dollar. You won't see them walking around with boxes of yen or British pounds or even euros. The guys like the US dollar, okay? Because it's the one that keeps its value for most part of it. So I just want to talk about panic as well. I was looking about panic. Now, you can see how many times people have panicked just in the question of about, what is it, 50 years. All right. All of these times, there was major panic in the world. There was runs on banks. Stock markets crashed. It was the end of the world. You know, people were jumping out of 3rd floors, 10 floors or whatever. Okay. But at no time did the world come to a halt. Because when there is this type of cycle, I'm going to show you the cycle in a moment, and that happens repeatedly. Okay, there's an opportunity again, not just in the financial market, also for us that are in ministry. And so from Worry and Anxiety, chapter 50, Mind, Character, and Personality, volume 2, she writes, seeking to reach the world standards. There are many of those whose hearts are aching under the load of care because they seek to reach the world standard. They have chosen its service, accepted its perplexities, adopted its customs. Thus, their characters marred and their life made a weariness. In order to gratify ambition and worldly desires, they wound the conscience and being upon themselves an additional burden of remorse. The continual worry is wearing out the life forces. Our Lord desires them to lay aside the yoke of bondage. He invites them to accept his yokes. He says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. He bids to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and his promises is that all things needful to them for this life shall be added. Worry is blind and cannot discern the future, but Jesus sees the end from the beginning. In every difficulty, he has prepared to bring relief. Desire of Ages, page 330. Further go on, faith dispels anxiety. And there I had to go and sit and think about myself. And I took out letter 57 because I've got all the letters as well. And she wrote the whole thing. This was actually, I think, to Willie, if I remember correctly. And she says, we are so anxious, all of us, for happiness, but many really find it because of their faulty methods of seeking in place of striving. We must strive most earnestly and mingle all our desires with faith. Then happiness steals in upon us almost unsought. Go read that, folks. That is so brilliant what she's written there. Then, when we can, notwithstanding disagreeable circumstances, rest confidently in his love and shut ourselves in with him, resting peacefully in his love, the sense of his presence will inspire deep, tranquil joy. This experience gains for us a faith that enables us not to fret, not to worry, but to depend on a power that is infinite. And remember, 1897, 15 years later, whatever, they had the First World War. Okay, the world was in turmoil. We had the Industrial Revolution. There was a whole lot of things happening at her time. A whole lot of things. We're not going to go through that history. So, strength for every trial. Our Heavenly Father measures and weighs every trial before he permits it to come on the believer. He considers the circumstances and the strength of the one who is to stand under proving and test of God. And he never permits temptations to be greater than capacity of resistance. If the soul is overborne, the person overpowered, this can never be charged to God as failing to give strength in grace. But the one tempted was not vigilant and prayerful and did not appreciate by faith the provisions God had abundantly in store for him. Christ never failed a believer in his hour of combat. The believer must claim the promise and meet the foe in the name of the Lord, and he will not know anything like failure. And my friend that I spoke about earlier, who has had such a really bad time in terms of finances, etc., he's the one who actually showed me this. And he said that's the promise he claimed. So I quickly want to go through an article that was done by a man I very much respect, a man that I used as the base for my sermons when I first came to Terabella, a gentleman called Tim Ark. At that stage, he was still a chartered accountant, a very good Seventh-day Adventist, a very pragmatic man. Okay, I met him in Johannesburg. He actually came to visit me in 2014, 15, after I'd accepted the truth of the feast. He actually made the time to come and see me, and later on, he was then or appointed as the associate treasurer and director of investments for the GC of Seventh-day Adventists. And I've kept in contact with him because he does very good studies on the world economy. And this is from his article that he wrote recently. And he talks about the biblical economy today. He talks about the economic fallout from COVID-19 pandemic has raised many fears, but also renewed interest in end-time events. As the number of economists suggesting a global depression increase, one wonders how a pandemic or economic depression fits into our understanding of eschatology. Scripture states that while the end will come as a thief in the night for some people, yea, brethren, are not in darkness, that this day should overtake you as a thief. In the light of scripture, history, and economics, as I put out now, okay, how are we to understand the events now taking place? So pre-existing conditions. As it was, it will be again. So while the coronavirus has been a catalyst for economic upheaval, many pre-existing conditions have made its financial impact potentially catastrophic for individuals, businesses, and even countries. Our current debt-driven, consumer-based economy in which individuals and corporations alike operate without savings seems to have no ability to withstand financial turmoil. Everyone, from a single parent to a small business to a multi-billion-dollar corporation, is looking for a bailout. Some were already dealing with realities of income inequality and a system stacked against them, while at the same time CEOs are paying themselves large bonuses with financially engineered profits at the expense of those saving for a rainy day. And that's very true, folks. It's not just in the United States, it's everywhere. The world is in a state of a medically induced economic coma, out of which many businesses will not recover. And it's true. We know of many businesses personally that have gone into bankruptcy and so on. So the silent depression, he says, the one economist reported the economic growth per capita in the past decade in the United States was actually worse than the Great Depression era of 1929 or the Long Depression of 1873. In fact, he calls the current era the silent depression too, a depression that no one in the financial media wants to admit or discuss, but in which people are clearly suffering. Only the use of enormous amounts of debt has been able to obscure the real impact of this financial condition. Indeed, we say, I am rich, I've become wealthy and have need of nothing. And do we know that we are wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked? Revelation 3:17. The world is coming to an end of a long economic cycle, as I said, that started after World War II, one that created great prosperity, but is now catching many in a downward spiral. Today, many, having lost sight of the financial prudence of their parents or grandparents, now find themselves in a kind of dire situation that always strike at the end of an economic cycle. Such long economic cycles have played out before in history, with each ending in a global depression and a societal upheaval. Interesting, those years and eras correspond with several key events in our understanding of church and prophetic history. So there's something called the Kondratief wave. And he speaks about the Kondratief wave in 1844. I'll show it to you in a moment, the little cycle. And it's done by a guy called Nikolai Kondratief, first studied such long economic cycles during the 1920s. And he observed they persisted over a 50 to 70 year period. Interesting, the 70-year period. Anybody remember 70 years in the Old Testament? What happened to Israel? Came out of Babylon. Okay, and characterized like seasons. As with spring and summer, the world's economies will grow well, followed by an economic plateau that would describe that one would describe as autumn. It plateaus. Then came the economic winter that typically saw debt crises, stock market crashes, depressions, world wars, and regime changes. Others have applied Kondratief's work to long economic cycles and have now called Kondratief wave 3 or long waves. Okay, I'm going to go read that. As Seventh-day Adventists, we find our attention immediately drawn to the date 1844 because it's such a significant event at the beginnings of the Advent movement. The year 1844 was the end of the first cycle of the 1800s, 44 years to get. Economists would deem the period from about 1837 to 1844 as an economic winter. Interesting. Characterized by deep depression, wars, and political turmoil. Uriah Smith, in his book Daniel and Revelation, pointed that the 1840 Ottoman regime ended in accordance with prophecy. It is the same period during which the Baptist preacher William Miller expounded on the 2,300-day prophecy in Daniel 8:14, declaring that the cleansing of the sanctuary would take place in 1844. So if you really go look in depth to this, and there's a whole thing around this, you can actually see the surrounding actions, the surrounding things happening, how that influenced their thinking. And it's so interesting that the Lord uses the economy to give those sounds, those waves. And as you can see there, he takes the waves from 1789, which was the French Revolution, 1260 days to 2020. And so it goes up. The 1837 panic of 1837. Remember, I had that list of panics there. Okay, bank crisis, whatever. It drops back to 1844 Millerite movement, 2,300 days. Then it builds up again to 1873, the panic of 1873. Then it drops again to the end of the Gilded Age, which leads to the Great Depression, etc., etc. Let me go into those quickly. The French Revolution. The previous wave had ended in 1789 with the beginning of the French Revolution. After a famine and grueling depression, French peasants rose up in revolt. As a result, the French Revolution, Napoleon's general Berthier arrested and exiled Pope Pius VI in fulfillment of another major time prophecy, and the 1260-day prophecy of Daniel. It was an era in which the years of repression now fostered new ideas and theories that opposed the ruling classes of both aristocracy and the church. Many embraced the ideologies of secular humanism, evolutionism, Marxism, and all of these things we still have with us today, to replace a theology steeped in hypocrisy and cruelty. Because remember, church at that stage was severely cruel, and yeah. But yeah, some of the parts of it has been through the ages. The non-Christian part, I would say. During this era, the United States arose as a nation, as we all know, prophecy, another feature of the end of such cycles. So it came out of one of these cycles. The up of it was the start of the United States. The panic of 1873, that next wave ended in 1896 after a very prolonged and long economic downturn that lasted for 20 years. Amid this economic malaise, the Adventist Church had its 1888 experience when the preaching of righteousness by faith was to be accompanied by the outpouring of the latter rain in a special power to equip the church for that final proclamation of truth of the everlasting gospel. Ellen White stated, "The loud cry of the third angel has already begun." History reveals that the church was unprepared to receive this special blessing. And this part of it we really have to go look at because it's happening again. Looking at the events that began contractive winter from 1870 to 1890 can be very instructive for Christians today. The cycle began with the panic of 1873. And please, let us not panic as Christians. A meltdown of the financial markets that grew into a long depression. This long depression, as historians called it, lasted for more than 5 years and was the longest ever officially recorded in the United States, outlasting the Great Depression of the 1930s. Even after the depression technically ended, the economy languished until the end of the cycle of 1896. And then Henry Blair, which we all know, 1888, introduced the US Senate bill that to establish the Sunday law. And we all know what that, it failed, okay? And we went on from there. So wars and rumors of wars, the next wave starting in 1896 to 1945, we were all, of course, in a great war. Those two wars, yeah, it had such detrimental effects on the normal person. But there were companies out there that were growing massively through those wars. Steel companies, big companies in the United States, not so much in Europe because Europe was war torn, but the Americans came out of that war a bit ahead of everybody else. It was a tragedy, of course. It's wars are not to be spoken well of. Okay, a lot of people lost their lives, but at the end of the day, though it may seem that there was no culmination of prophetic event at this time, it may be that it is still the beginning of a key end time prophecy. And so he talks about the Laodicea and the age of prosperity, and I'm coming to the end. The post-war II era ushered in an era of unprecedented world prosperity. And that's where we're living in, folks. The US Marshall Plan helped to rebuild the war-torn economies, and America benefited by becoming the global economic engine. And so we must realize the US became the reserve currency only after the wars. Okay, it was because the economy came out of the war good, because the war machine helped. Okay, the US dollar was such a strength. Europe was gone. Far East, China, Japan, sitting in mud. Japan had been basically killed off by 2 atom bombs. Okay, so those economies were gone, and the United States had a 100-meter start on a 400-meter sprint. And in the 1980s, corporations began to seek greater profits by offshoring their production to Asia and other regions. Now, here's the ironic thing: you would know if you study U.S. history that in the 1980s, because of them pushing to get away from expensive local labor, they started outsourcing and moving the car companies overseas to various Far East countries, selling off brands like Ford, etc., trying to. A lot of your big industries was placed overseas. Okay, so you became, and most people in the world became, the strong manufacturing economy shifted to one driven by debt and consumption. We became we became nations of consumption. I include our own country because we are very wealthy in things like minerals, agriculture, etc. But instead of producing, we've become a country of consumption. So debt levels grew, and of course, we were heading for another contractive winter when that bubble burst. So in short, the past is the prologue. Okay. The latest one, of course, I just want to read at the bottom. In 2020, many have borrowed to create rental homes, making Airbnb just another word for subprime mortgages of 2008. Many people bought properties to rent out to make money, and they did it on credit. It's just created the same thing that happened in 2008. Okay. Now, the government is bailing out not only financial sector, but also every business and worker. Governments around the world have pledged tens of trillions of dollars to keep the system from imploding. That's what's going on now. So after all of that, what is the lesson for us? The key takeaway for us as Christians is not so much that this is a contractive winter that we're heading to. Rather, history shows us that these economic winters are really harvest seasons for God. 1 Corinthians 4:5 says, therefore judge before the time until the Lord comes, who will both bring to light the hidden things of darkness and reveal the counsels of their hearts. Then each one's praise will come from the Lord. Let us harvest. The great opportunity for us, and this is, I think, the final slide. The great opportunity. So what is this economic winter? The key takeaway for us is this is not so much that this is a contractive winter. Rather, history shows us that these are real harvest seasons. Where will we go from here? Will all the printed money transport the economy back to January 2020 to a world before we knew coronavirus and lockdowns? Or will economic gravity, which has already been pulling, fully take over and bring an economic winter to this inevitable conclusion as it always does? Has God in his foresight planned for a paradigm shift for his church? A massive redirection and mobilization of peoples previously paralyzed in a Laodicean state. God's mercy, his sustaining providence, has never to be forgotten deliverances are to be recounted step by step. As God's people must review the past, they could see that the Lord is ever repeating his dealings. They should understand the warnings given. They should be aware not to repeat those mistakes. Renouncing all self-dependence, they are to trust in him to save them from again dishonoring his name. Perhaps God has guided the world through economic cycles, history, and prophecy to prepare his people to recognize the events of a COVID-19 financial crisis as at the moment the greatest opportunity in the history of his workings with humans. So technologies, he speaks about that, the good of technology. But what I want to really say to you folks, don't panic. Don't panic. All right. There's nothing we can do on a worldwide scale. Yes, we can go read about it. What I've done in the last couple of years is I've focused specifically on specific news channels, etc. Because a lot of the stuff we have in our country is very sensationalist. The mainstream media lies to an effect that, honestly, you can't trust anything our channels say in this country. So I use a lot of YouTube. I watch a lot of independent people. Okay, and the one thing I've learned, and I have been in a bank twice that has closed. because of a run on the bank. I've worked for banks like that. And folks, let me tell you, the biggest thing that triggers it is unreasonable fear. Fear that I'm going to lose my pension, fear that I'm going to lose that money I worked for 40 years, fear that I'm going to lose everything. Okay. And it's like anything, people get this mentality, this, call it herd mentality, and they rush. Herd mentality we saw a lot during COVID as well, when people went out there and bought toilet rolls for some reason by the flipping box load. I don't know about your country, but in my country, there seems to have been this obsession with toilet roll. So my question, just once again, I've gone through this quickly because it's actually a long presentation. I hope I'm not too far over. Yes, I am. Oh, sorry, Sandy. Do we trust in God? I just want to read this one text, especially now that we're in the week coming to the end of unleavened bread. You are to keep the feast of unleavened bread as I commanded you. At the appointed time in the month of Abib, you are to eat the unleavened bread for 7 days, because that was the month you came out of Egypt. No one may appear before me empty-handed. We spoke about it a bit earlier. While you still can do good, do good. Our Father in heaven, Lord, thank you so much for this presentation, Lord. I hope I have been succinct and clear what I wanted to say. Lord, please, I'm asking this evening that you rain down the Holy Spirit on people and clean their hearts. Lord, we have a promise from you, and we claim that promise this evening. Let us not fear because of money. Let us go forward because you will provide, Lord. You have proven it to me over the last 14 years that I've been a Seventh-day Adventist. I've seen so many miracles. I've been the biggest doubting Thomas that has probably lived in the church. You gave me a ministry that people said was impossible. And Lord, it's just because of you that happened. I look at Bible exploration, the continuation of a wonderful ministry. And Lord, I ask that you protect it, that you provide for it, Lord, as you've always done. Every dear person here who is in ministry, you know their needs. And this evening, let us walk forward without fear of any external thing, any external pressure on the economy. Let us take note of it as an opportunity to go out and harvest your people. We thank you for this week and the wonderful messages and all the things you've given us to make us think once again. And once again, we thank you for the sacrifice of your Son and the promise you made to us. And we call upon you, Lord, this evening to forgive us our sins at the end of this week as we come to the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the end of it. We love you, Lord, and we would like to go home soon, but we know there's a big work to be done. Be with us, lead us, guide us. In the mighty name of your Son, Yeshua. Amen. Sorry, I really spoke a bit fast there.
That was good. Thank you.
Okay, I hope so.
Interesting, very interesting. And we need to hear it. You started a little late. You went fine.
Sorry, I went over a bit. Sorry about that, Sandy.
No, you didn't. You started late, so you did just fine.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Anybody have any questions for him or any comments or?
Please,
Yeah, hi.
please ask.
I listened to this guy who worked at the city of London, at all banks.
Mm.
And he said that while working there, he did approximately $1 trillion a day went through his hands, all electronic. And he said a lot of that stuff was the banks trying to bring their books, level their books by the end of the day.
No, we do
And
it. We call it clearing. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's called clearing. You see what happens is you've got a circle of. There's actually a video about it. I was watching it earlier in the week. They showed it in a circle. You've got 5 or 6 banks, and so you online you go and you pay. I pay Sandy at Bank A. I'm from Bank B. That comes off my account immediately at the moment. All right. And it reflects in Sandy's account if I do an instant payment. But there's not a physical clearing done yet between the two banks. It just shows. At the end of the
Right.
day, the treasury department of every bank sits and it looks at all the debits and all the credits. Okay, so money coming in, money going out, and it clears. We used to do it when I started in banking. We used to do it by hand. Every morning, as a young clerk, I would go with a satchel full of checks and slips to the Central Reserve Bank in Pietermaritzburg, and all my counterparts from the other banks would sit there, and we would tally everything up with a hand calculator, and then I would issue a check to all the other banks, and they would issue to me if they owed me. So it was like an offset every day by hand.
To make sure,
We've
to
come
make
up,
sure everything's balanced.
everything balances, yeah.
You know how you were talking about it's instant? What about when you're paying like a credit card bill or the automatic payments? Those say pending all the time. They're pending for days sometimes. It's really a pain. I wish
Yes.
it was.
Yeah, it
Will
depends
those go
on what
instant?
system. Yeah. Sandy, it depends on what system your bank is using. Okay, so one of the things that, like I think I mentioned the last time, one of the systems they are doing in South Africa now, I don't know about America, but we have now, every time I open my money app for my bank that I do all my transactions on, okay, it comes up with a little thing to say, there's now an additional app, okay, that I can pay instantly bank to bank, okay. So it's taking out that, and I can pay credit cards, because credit cards in a banking environment actually sits apart from a bank, from the commercial bank side. It's a separate department. In fact, it's a separate bank. Us in commercial banks actually don't like credit cards very much, okay? Because they have their own set of rules, their own set of clearing. They work different, okay? And what is one of the things that banks worldwide are trying to do at the moment is really trying to sort out that lag, because every day they don't pay your card, even though you've paid and it's not on your account, they ask you interest. And credit cards are criminal on that. And I can say that because I don't work for a bank anymore.
Well, the PayPal and everything is pretty much instant, always has been, depending on who
Yeah.
you send it to. And Venmo
Well,
is instant, but it's not necessarily instant out of your account, but it's definitely to the other person. But I don't know if they're going to change fees if it goes more instant or what they're going to do.
No, you must see
They already charge that fee.
the big thing for people are price sensitive and fee sensitive around anything. It's like us, paying for anything. Okay. But here's the thing. Okay. I always wonder, Mrs. White going to Australia, okay, with a bag of money, because she did. Okay. Right. She didn't have a check or whatever. She didn't have an account in Australia. And Australia was still running around in, sorry, now it sounds very, very bad, but it's in lion cloths and dingo bats. So it was the early 1900s, there was no real Australia. And she went to Avondale and she went with a bag of money, okay, because that's what she had. And, today you can send me, I can send you, we can all send each other money within instant. That's how technology has changed it. What I'm saying as well is that let's not be afraid of technology as well. Let's be careful of it. Okay. And yes, like your government has now said with the digital currency, it has built. And by the way, that comes from those official sites as well. We've had a discussion. I was part of a discussion the other day with the University of Pretoria. By the way, I'm going to be working for them pretty soon as a part-time lecturer, and about these things. And I put it from a Christian point of view. I didn't say it was a Christian, but I said to them the fears of people. What is it? What if the government gets hold? Okay, and what they said was, actually, you must understand, the government already has got hold of most of your stuff. Okay. The one thing I always find so interesting is when people, and we've got a person here in this country who wants to open a bank, but he wants to make it gold-based. Okay, so link the currency to gold-based, which is what BRICS wants to do, the BRICS Bank. The problem with that is, okay, so against what currency are you pegging it, the gold? Rands or dollars? And because dollars is currently the reserve price, it's going to be dollars. So it's actually irrelevant. You might as well just take the dollar like that. Okay, so it's people ask the question, so how am I going to trade? And I saw a lot, Keith, this week I saw a lot of people selling off silver. by the bucket load. Okay. And there's people here who, locally by me, who've bought big amounts of silver. But silver is not the thing they're going to trade in. Okay. And now governments are putting restrictions on it that you can only hold a certain amount of silver. It's like the old days when you could only hold a certain amount of gold. So you're going to be in contravention anyways if you keep 50,000 rands of, or 50,000. I don't know how. Is 50,000 a little bit of money for you, Sandy? But say you've got 50,000 rands of silver in your garage. You know how much silver that is? You're gonna have to have one of those little 3-wheelers of yours to push it around. And how are you going to trade with that? And what value are you going to put to it? Because is silver going to have a silver value that you can trade, or is it going to have a dollar value?
Right.
And
And
my
the
whole
government
point
does
about this,
whatever it wants. Sometime back in the day, one of the presidents, I mean, people had gold and they said, you can't use it. You can't save it. Paul, you had a question?
Yes,
yes,
Just all go away. It didn't do any good.
Yeah.
go.
I've had to step away there for a few minutes. I didn't catch the beginning of the presentation, but I believe this whole digital system is being put in place because if it wasn't put in place, then God's word says that we won't be able to buy or sell unless we receive the mark of the beast. And if we were still able to have dollars and things like that, or whatever our money currency is, we would be able to hide it back, we'd be able to bury it and whatever and use it in the end times. But if they make it totally worthless, then the digital, all they have to do is go in there and control alt delete you, and you have nothing to deal with and barter with. And then I also have a question for Tom, if he's still on, Tom Stapleton.
Tom, you're up.
Doesn't look like he is. Oh,
Okay,
yeah, there's there.
There he is. He's there.
He's still there.
He might not be able to hear.
He'd not
Okay.
be able to hear you.
Anybody else have anything else? That was very good. Thank you, Hein. A lot of good info.
I am listening, but I'm hiding, so I'm making
Oh, Tom.
myself some lunch. Was there a question or something?
Oh, I was just
Paul,
going to say,
go on.
that on that presentation you gave, I've heard this teaching before.